Hello, and welcome back to Stu Structures. I'm Mark Stewart, and we're here to show you how to build prototypical model railroad structures for your layout. So stay tuned. As promised in my last video, we're here to work on this tower, which is D Tower from Grafton, West Virginia on the B&O Railroad. But before I get too involved in that, I want to show you the steps of how to get the information that it takes and where to get the measurements to build a prototypical building that you're wanting to build for your model layout. I guess to begin with, what you really need to do is pick a location. Many of you already probably have a location. But if not, pick somewhere where you grew up, somewhere that you have a lot of interest in or fond memories of. Maybe an area where one of your relatives worked on the railroad that you have information on, or something of very high significant historical value if you're a historian. Something that'll give you the drive to build the buildings and stuff that you really want to build. The next thing you need to do is really choose an era that you want to build. A lot of these buildings change over time. The main structure itself doesn't necessarily, but some of the awnings, the roofs, the loading docks, a lot of things around the structures do change over time, so you need to know what's appropriate for the time period that you're wanting to model. After you've got those choices out of the way, the next thing you really need to do is do research. I've spent years looking for some of the stuff that I've came across to build some of my structures. Hopefully it won't take you that long. But you need to, if the structure still exists, get permission from the property owner and go take pictures, take measurements of the building, make sure you get locations of all the windows and doors and things like that. Some good photographs also will give you collars. Sometimes look at paint chips on the building if you're wanting a previous era. Sometimes you can find some of the older paint layers showing through that will give you accurate paint colors for one of the previous time periods that you may be wanting to model. This research will take you also into the possibility of maybe even come across some blueprints. A lot of structures do still have blueprints available. Some of mine had them and some of them did not, and I had to use photographs and other things. But photographs are wonderful if you can find some that still exist. Photographs is one of the most likely areas that you'll get information from. If you do look for photographs, look for ones, if they're digital, that are scanned at a really high DPI. It's nice to blow them up sometimes and look for all that little detail. Sometimes it'll give you a lot of information you don't see just from a small photograph. Also, look for maps. Some of the Sanborn maps and earlier maps like that from the insurance companies early last century actually give you an accurate dimensional footprint of the building, which is a place to start sometimes. And we'll go through some of that as we're building these structures as well, because some of them have little tricks that you can find out information by blowing up pictures and various things, and we'll go through some of that. Here's a slide that shows some of the information and place to look for things.
I really can't stress enough the Railroad Historical Society groups. They've been just had tons of information. I worked at the B&O Railroad Historical Society in a suburb of Baltimore for 3.5 years. And at that point in time, a lot of the records were still unsorted and things like that. So it was amazing what we came across during that period of time. They've recently moved into a new building and now is really a nice research facility. But no matter what railroad you're looking for information on, support their local or that railroad's historical society, because if you support them, it's amazing how much information you can get through them. Even as a non-member, it'll probably cost you a little more, but it's amazing how much information they have. Another source of information that I found really useful was the county and local historical groups. The Taylor County in West Virginia actually had a lot of records and stuff that came from the B&O Railroad buildings as they were turned over to local people and things like that. So there was a lot of files to go through with blueprints and things like that on several buildings. but even the local historical groups can lead you to other people that have information locally that have collected this over the years. Another source that I found really useful was West Virginia University, but any state's university has collections and regional collections of photographs, maps, and stuff like that on the areas that you're researching. Even smaller state and local colleges have information available. One of the other resources that I almost overlooked were just the local libraries. Many of them have little notebooks of various paper clippings and photographs and things they've collected on local history. Some of the historical society and groups keep their records available to the public in local libraries too, and are really good. One thing that didn't help me, but I know a lot of people use for a resource, are railroad hobby magazines. A lot of structures down through the years have had drawings and articles written on them, a lot of times even with hints on how to build and do certain things on the buildings, which is very helpful. One building that I'm modeling was a mid-1800s structure, and it was a stacked stone structure which has been gone for a long time now. But in looking for information on it, I found where a group had came in and done a study on the building before it was torn down, and all the records are available now at the Library of Congress, so even that was a very nice find. As I mentioned earlier, private collectors, there are tons of people out here that collect photographs and railroad memorabilia that have blueprints and all kinds of stuff in it. So look for those sources in localities where you're doing your research. A lot of times retired workers from those buildings or areas around them have pictures of them with the buildings or interiors or various things that are very useful and will have a lot of good information. Worst comes to worst, I mean, eBay and online sites offer a lot of good information. A lot of it's for sale. Some sites just people that are looking at the hobby and researching the railroad in general will have stuff that are available to you and will trade or sell outright, or even give you sometimes copies of things they have in your collection. So all this is just tons of information that's good stuff that will help you build all those buildings you're looking for information on. Okay, so we're going to continue the roof build on this building. I'm going to come through here and cut off all these shingles on this last side that I had previously done where they overlap the roof joints. And you can see I've started the bottom row on this side. I'm going to continue it up this side and finish the shingles. I've drawn several lines across the basswood horizontally to keep me in line as I go up, so I don't get everything at an odd angle by the time I get to the top. I make my shingles out of 400 grit emery paper. It has a nice black shingle look to it. I cut these 1/8 inch strips and then come back and just cut shingles about halfway through the 1/8 inch. I do cut them off at about 1 inch long to work with them because they have a tendency to curl once I cut them, and the long strips are harder to get straight on the roof than 1 inch strips. I use an Elmer's glue. It has good adhesion from paper to the basswood, and it's long lasting. And I just take them one at a time and overlap the previous row and keep them horizontal as I work up the building. I do try to only do maybe 3, 4, 5 rows at the very most at a time and let the glue set up, because as you're working on further up the building, it has a tendency to move down below you if you don't let it set up, and you don't want to mess yourself up too bad. Now I'm starting the eave pieces, or the cover over the two different sides at the corners here. There's the 4 corner pieces and the top piece. I cut these a little long. The tops I keep flush, but I'll let them run by the corners so I can come back and cut them off later on. And I do the 4 corners, and I do the top piece last. I fold them in half before I put them on, so it makes it easier to lay once I put the glue on it, and I don't have to fight with it quite as much as I lay it on the roof and get the glue to start setting up. The top piece I put on last because it's what would be done on a real roof. It would overlap the lower pieces so none of the water would get underneath the pieces below it, and it would shed water and not get down to the wood of the roof. And once I have all this on, I let everything set up really good before I come back and trim anything or do any work, because I don't want anything to move that I've done previously to being and cutting them off. Here you can see I'm just using regular scissors and cutting off the corners to match the roof. I made my own smoke jack for this. This is just a couple different sizes of round plastic that I've glued together and filed a pointed top for it, and I'll drill a hole and put it in. The old structure had a round copper gutter on it. I thought I had some round tubing I was going to use for this, and I didn't have anything appropriate, so I just decided to go ahead and use these flat pieces of styrene to make some U-channel and use it as a gutter. These are .020 thickness and 1.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter wide. And just like I said, I cut these into a U-channel, or glued them into a U-channel using plastic weld glue, and then wrapped the gutters all the way around the building. Just laid them up against the building, cut 45s on the corner, and glued all the ends together and glued them to the building, and wrapped the whole gutter all the way around. Later on I'll come back and paint this. Some of the white edges to the sandpaper do show through, so it'll need to be painted and then weathered. I used a little Elmer's glue around the smoke jack, so I have to paint that to look like tar where the roof jack meets the roof, and then proceed on with the building down below so this can sit on something.
Okay, so that's this segment on putting this roof together for this building. Excuse the mess around here. I need to clean up my mess. Maybe I'll do a show on cleaning up my mess. In any case, while I was working, a tripod fell over on my desk and kind of did a little damage to what I had worked on across here, so I've got to come back and repair that. If it wasn't my mess here, it probably wouldn't have happened. I'm not a real strict rivet counter. I'm normally a little closer maybe than what I would like this to be, but this is more of a background building on the layout, the way our layout is situated. So I think it gives a real strong impression of the building. So I think in the long run I'm going to be happy with it, and we'll continue on with this build in the next video that I do. However, I did want to touch on something that I mentioned earlier. When you're doing buildings, you need to create a footprint of your building, so when you're laying track and stuff, some people do complete mock-ups of the buildings and set them in place. That can be very helpful too, in cases especially where you have overhangs like this that are near the tracks. It makes sure you have good clearance there, whereas a footprint wouldn't necessarily give you the whole idea of what's going on next to the tracks. But most of my buildings are not that way. This is one that I'm going to use for the freight station. So as we're laying track at the club, we can put this in place and we know where our clearances are. It gives the building, but it also includes all the walkways and platforms next to the railroad itself on this side, and where the street is, there's also a small raised area where cars can back up to and load out from the freight house. So this is a very good idea if you're building buildings. It gives you a good sense of how large your buildings are and how they're going to work in with your railroad. So like I said, on the next video we're going to continue our build on the tower. I'll go in a little bit more into a few of the things on getting dimensions and that thing together for your buildings. None of this is really hard. It's all relatively simple. The biggest thing about it is it's time consuming. And a lot of the techniques and stuff that you'll come across, a lot of it is just trying them a couple of times to get comfortable with them, to using them on your layout. Like I said, none of it's really hard. So jump out there and find a building that you'd like to build. and go through this process. It's very rewarding, and it's something to be proud of when you have it sitting next to your railroad, and it's something nobody else is going to have on theirs. Also, hit the subscribe button at the bottom. That way, and hit the little bell there. That way you'll be notified the next time one of my videos come out. I'm going to try and get something out every couple of weeks or so. I'm not sure. My time is very constrained, so I'm not sure how well that's going to work out, but I'm going to try. And we'll see where we go from there. So until next time, thank you again for visiting. I'm glad you came back to watch another video with me. And happy railroading.